anniversary, maybe we end the way we used to do things, and we kind of enter into a new phase of in session film. And so that's what we've done. So Ryan and Jay and Brennan and myself have we've combined the main show and extra film as of this last week. So you can not only listen to the four of us as we dive into all kinds of film conversation, but we've now put the podcast on YouTube, so you can watch us.
I know.
At in our In Session Film YouTube channel, which is very exciting. We have a new structure, a new format to the show, because the biggest criticism we've always received is that the shows are too long. And we knew that for the longest time, and we've done our best to try to cut it down. And this new format will get us over that finish line.
Okay.
In fact, this last week, episode 519, the first show of the new format, it was the first show under 2 hours in like 250 episodes. Like,
it's been a while.
So long. Been so long. So I was like, oh my gosh, that's very exciting. And then among that, we'll have reviews and a bunch of other content coming out. So there's a lot happening right now.
For sure. I hope guys check you out, JD, because you guys are awesome. And
appreciate it.
Just your dedication to film, movies, and to your point, I mean, joking around about the length of the podcast, but it's like, even if you weren't recording it and you're just sitting around the campfire at the bar or whatever, and you're talking to your friends about something you're so passionate about, and you look down at your watch and you're like, oh my God, it's been 2, 3, 4 hours. You don't even realize it if it's something that you're really into. And that comes across big time. So,
and that's ultimately why the shows have gone as long as they have, especially the reviews themselves. And it is exactly that, where the passion, and we're trying to be as thoughtful in the conversations as we can. You lose track of time, and the next thing you know, you're talking about Inside Llewyn Davis for an hour and 15 minutes. And you're like, look, it wasn't planned. It just comes out. So
we had to do it.
Exactly.
Well, why don't you tell everybody, JD? So you're here with me to do a top 5 list tonight, which, like I said, I'm so excited you're finally making it over to the P's here. What is the topic? And then we'll kind of talk a little bit about our criteria for the topic. But what is the top 5 list tonight, man?
So we're doing our top 5 child performances in film. And again, for any listeners of the In Session Film podcast that's also listening to this, you'll know what that means to me and why by 5, this could end up being your first 2-hour show, because I'm going to talk about my 5 forever. At some point, you're going to have to hit the buzzer to be like, okay, let's reel this in.
All right, I'll try to police you a little bit, but I also want you to have fun. So now let's talk a little bit about that. So I had this to-do list of about, 20 or 30 topics, and I said, here you go, man. Like, if you can't think of anything, what do you want to pick from? And you kind of honed in on this one, and it really stood out to you. So just to let everyone know too, a little asterisk up top, when the actor or actress performed in the movie, they had to be 16 years or younger is what we decided.
Yes.
So no one over the age of 16 at the time of filming the production that we're going to mention them in.
Yes.
Now that we have that little kind of parameter out of the way, otherwise it's really kind of wide open. It just had to be a movie as opposed to like a television or whatever. So JD, why were you so passionate about this topic? And for those that may not have heard your passion for this genre, if you will, subgenre, childhood acting, whatever you want to call it, over on In Session, why was it such a big deal to do this topic for you?
Okay, I'll try to articulate this without crying. So really, a lot of it for me is and I've talked about this so many times over the years, I think that childhood is the most special time of our lives. It's the most innocent. It's the most pure for a lot of us. Ultimately, at some point in all of our lives, that is broken. And I think there's something transcendent and profound about whatever that experience is. But when you're a kid, and if you have kids or nephews or nieces, you see this all the time when they indulge in that just pure innocence. I just think is fascinating. And movies and child performances, I think, have captured that so magically over the years. I think I talked about this when the last time we got together. Like, Citizen Kane is my favorite film of all time, because that is a movie about a man that at the end of his life, more than anything else, was yearning for his childhood. That's all he wanted. He just wanted to go back to that time when he was 8 years old and can go sledding down a hill and have the time of his life. And I think there is something inherently visceral about us as human beings that want that all the time. And I think even as adults, we do the same, whether it's playing with our kids or playing video games or whatever nostalgia or whatever that drives the joy in our lives. Not all of it, but much of it, I think, also kind of tethers back to our childhood in some way, and the kind of joy that we experienced as a kid. So I'm very much drawn to that in movies. A lot of, like, if you look at my top 20 movies of all time, a lot of them tackle this idea in one way or another. And so the performances that we're going to talk about tonight, I have championed heavily on our show for quite some time. So,
well, one thing that kind of I was thinking about as I was coming up with my list, and I don't like to give any titles away at the top. I'm sure you know. We'll wait till we get into it, but just generally speaking, as an adult, and you look at adult actors that some of which may be your favorites of all time or whatever, they've had those experiences in their life. They're able to tap into those different emotions and kind of relive what they either have been through themselves or what they may have knowledge of. But when you're talking about teenagers or 10-year-olds, or on my list, a couple 6-year-olds, like, they don't have those experiences. They don't have that knowledge inherent within them. So they literally have to form this performance to make you believe what their character is going through. And I have young kids, and my kids are great. Don't take that the wrong way. But like, when I see some of these performances on screen from these young folks, it's just really like, it's just so commendable and should be applauded almost more than whoever your favorite adult actor is, if that makes sense. Just because I feel like they really have to double down on what they're doing.
I agree. No, it's quite phenomenal, the depths and the emotional nuance that many of these child performers are able to capture without having that life experience, as you're talking about. However, the director has helped them get there.
Sure.
It is pretty phenomenal what they're able to achieve at such a young age. And like I said, I think even as adults watching those performers and what they're tapping into, I think is something that we can all relate with in some way. And in many cases, I think in some pretty deeply profound ways.
For sure. All right, JD's here from In Session Film, a topic that I know he's excited to discuss. We're going to do our top 5 childhood movie performances, and it has to be anyone that was under the age of 16 when the movie was filmed. JD, you want to get us started, man? What is your number 5 and why?
Okay, so my number 5, also, let me emphasize how difficult this list was.
Yeah, I need to tell them, by the way. You tried to sneak in 20 tonight. You joked, 15 honorables.
Yeah,
and I said,
joked,
whoa.
Yeah, I joked earlier that I had a top 20 that I was just going to lay out here.
Yeah.
And I very much could. So it was challenging narrowing this list down. But ultimately, the 5 I have here I do love. So at number 5 for me, I'm going to the late, great River Phoenix. Stand By Me is the film from 1986. This film is one of my favorite films of the 80s, and a lot of it really circles down to the performances of this film, and specifically what River Phoenix brings to it regarding his character, what he's experiencing here, what he has experienced, and how it drives a lot of the choices that he makes and the friends around him, as well as they go on this little journey together. And then ultimately where it all ends is quite heartbreaking, I think, in many ways, especially when you look back at the life of River Phoenix in kind of a more meta sense. But this is one of the more moving performances of not just child performances, but across the board performances, especially of its time. Just an incredible film by Rob Reiner. And I think it's probably it's my favorite Rob Reiner film for sure. But I'm also trying to think here on the spot.
A Few Good Men, Stand By Me.
Well, yeah, some good stuff. But I was going to say this might be a top 5 '80s film for me. That's how
Yeah,
high
I
I
can see
am
that.
on the movie, and a lot of it comes down to the camaraderie of these characters and the friendship at play, how all of that kind of fizzles, and really it's the performances that drive this. I mean, it is a really good screenplay, but I think more than anything, what I love about Reiner's direction is he just points the camera and
Hmm.
he just lets these children kind of tap into this despondency that comes about, and I love it, absolutely love it. So yeah,
I do
River
too, man.
Phoenix at number 5.
I do too, man, and I agree with you wholeheartedly. Any regular listeners that are tuning in, they're like, "Well, we have crossover already," because they know me. So I'll be talking. I'll be talking about this a little bit later. It's a little higher on my
Okay.
list, but I have the
Okay.
same
Yeah.
actor, the same movie. I'm not even joking. You probably could have picked any of those boys from this film, and I would have. It would have
Yeah.
been a sure thing.
Honestly. Yeah.
And really, as an ensemble, what? Again, they're so young; they don't have these experiences that their characters are going through in the movie. And not only that, it's a period piece. It's taking place in the 50s. So they just don't have a lot of knowledge
Yeah.
about what's going on around them. And they just sold it so well. And,
Mhm.
you know, yeah, the friendship, the kinship, so many things about this movie. It's in my top 20 movies of all time across any genre. I
Yeah.
will
There
be
you go.
talking about
Yeah.
it shortly. But let's just say I agree with your pick. So that's your number 5. My
All
number
right.
5 is the youngest actor in my top 5. I do have a couple that are younger that I'll mention later in my honorable mentions, but he was
Okay.
10 years old at the time this movie was made, and he's gone on to do other things. He's still prominent in pop culture, and he's done some really really good stuff. But this is the movie that I feel like everybody knows him because of this role,
Mm.
and it was at 10 years old. He will never be able to escape it, and that's just fascinating to me. But it's Macaulay Culkin from Home Alone, from the
Oh,
Home Alone
okay. Yeah.
franchise. I mean, just so
Good
memorable. I
stuff.
mean,
Yeah.
it's one of the best holiday films. We watch it every year in my house. It's a great kind of like cat and mouse chase movie as well.
Mhm.
And he's setting up all these elaborate plots for the burglars, and he was so cute, and he was just like you were just drawn to him. You rooted for him. His family leaves him at home, and this is in the era before cell phones. So it's such a great premise back then. It came out in
Mhm.
1990. So it was a sweet spot before cell phones and technology, wouldn't really make sense in today's world. And then the
Yeah.
sequel was really good too, and he was still young in that as well. But I mean, Macaulay Culkin, you look at him now, anything he does, it's like Home Alone. That's what you just think. Or at least me, like I just always think of him in this role.
Mhm.
And anytime you have a feel good holiday classic, it just feels good to watch it, and I
Yeah.
think his performance has a lot to do with it. So are you a fan of Macaulay and Home Alone?
I am. I really like the film a lot. It's a good honorable mention. It's not in my top 10,
Hmm. Hmm.
but again, if we're expanding
If we went
beyond
20, then
10, yeah, no, it's a really good classic performance, and what I really like about the first film especially, although I think you get this in the second as well, is how playful it is through a lot of the film, and he taps into that playfulness very well. But there are moments of drama where the stakes become a little bit more real, and I think he taps into that
hmm
extremely well at the same time. So and that could have been a little bit jarring if the performance wasn't able to ride that line, because moments before, let's say when he's lifted up onto the wall by one of the antagonists there, like he's like throwing paint buckets at them, and he's doing a lot of just goofy stuff that's really fun to watch.
right.
And then in a moment, the tone of the film changes drastically,
The
and
stakes are raised for sure.
the
Yeah,
stakes are raised, and I think he gives credence to how a child in that moment would react, and it's really great. So, and then there's even a little tinge of pathos at the end of the film when his family comes back and they're all celebrating
sure.
Christmas under one roof. That's done with some great subtlety. So, yeah, it's a
And
very good
when
performance.
the family aspects were done really well too, I thought,
Yeah.
because
Mhm.
because you know it was kind of like a love-hate thing in the first half of the movie, or before
Yeah.
they leave town, I should say. He was
Mhm.
the misbehaved child, and they were just sending him to his room, and it was a lot of yelling, and we kind of forget what really is important. And then he goes through this experience, and when they come back and he sees his mom for the first time, I mean, every year I watch this, I cry with
Mhm.
that scene,
Yeah.
and I can tell you, my wife does as a mom.
Sure.
Seeing her little
Yeah.
boy again, and not knowing if she was
Mhm.
going to, and not knowing if he was okay, and
Mhm.
so yeah, it does have a lot of emotion built into it too, which it's
Mhm.
a slapstick kind of comedy at kind of like, but underneath the surface, they have kind of the extra stuff going on. So
Yeah. Good stuff.
that's my number five. We're over to you. You had River Phoenix at your five. What's your number four?
All right. So for my number four, I'm going to the world of Andrei Tarkovsky. I'm going to the film Ivan's Childhood, Nikolai Burlev. Hopefully, I'm pronouncing that right. Forgive me if I'm not. That is my number four pick here. For anyone that hasn't seen Ivan's Childhood, it's
I have not.
not an easy watch, but I think it's my favorite Tarkovsky. I mean, there's so many great Tarkovsky films, it's almost futile to compare them. And Ivan's Childhood might be his most accessible narratively and dramatically. It's perhaps his most seamless or less abstract. Maybe that's the best way to articulate it. But it may be ironic to say accessible because I don't know how accessible it
I
really
haven't
is.
seen
It
it.
is it's a
I've heard of it. I haven't seen it.
yeah, it's a depressing experience, but one that I think gets into the ramifications of war in a really great way as the film explores how war robs children of their innocence. I mentioned a moment ago when talking about why I'm so drawn to this topic, and I do think there is something heartbreaking about a child who is able to indulge innocently in their childhood and then how that is ripped away from them suddenly. There are two films on my list that dive into that specifically. This is one of them, and it's fascinating to see how Tarkovsky does that here with the Ivan character,
Hmm.
because he doesn't have any parents. We learn through flashback and some storytelling that he's on his own, and he eventually joins this Russian unit who find him as he's roaming the woods essentially. And then these soldiers, there's one captain specifically that becomes a surrogate father of sorts, and there's conversations about adopting him even. But of course it's Tarkovsky, so without getting into any spoilers, it doesn't have a Hollywood ending. I guess I'll just say it like that. And but it gets into not just the cost of war, the ramifications that come about. It does that in a very Tarkovsky way, but again, specifically emphasizing the cost of humanity and Ivan and his childhood specifically, and Nikolai Burlev for being, I don't know, 8 or 9 years old in his performance here. It is quite astounding how he's able to render the level of sorrow that we see in that character. It is quite visceral, but really great. And
What's
again, not an easy
what's
watch, but my number four here.
what's the year on it again? Do you know?
Ivan's childhood. That is a good question, and I will
I didn't know
have
if you
the
mentioned it.
answer for you. It is 1962.
Okay, so an oldie. All right.
Yeah.
It's one I'll have to check out for sure. I have not seen that one, but you sold it. I need to check it out. I love a
Mm.
good kind of like torturous child performance too, which is kind of what it sounds like, you know.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there are moments of, I don't want to say levity, but where the tension isn't quite as thick before things topple on themselves. But yeah, I
Okay.
mean, if you like Tarkovsky, it's a recommendation. But broadly
All right.
speaking, it's not something you just you hand out flyers to, like, come see this movie. But yeah,
Well,
great
my
performance.
number yeah, it sounds great, man. My number 4 is another one that my regular listeners are going to be like, "Oh God, this thing again." Chris Annie's over in the chat on YouTube right now. I can't wait to see what he says. But it's going to be Chloe Grace Moretz, but maybe not from the film that you think. I'm going to name "Let Me In" here, which is the
Oh, okay.
remake of "Let the Right
Yeah.
One In."
Yeah.
The great kind of vampire love story slash coming of age tale,
Mhm.
and directed by Matt Reeves, who of course has gone on to do, the Batman this year and so many great things as
Yeah.
a filmmaker. But we kind of started to see that kind of dark and brooding style of filmmaking with movies like Let Me In. And
Yeah.
Cody Smith McPhee is kind of her opposite here, and they are, scene partner here. And they have this beautiful friendship and kind of eerie, uh it's like something's kind of off, but and you kind of are worried for both of them. But it's a very like there's a lot of just carnal, just almost like winter snow, blood in the snow, like it's shot in a way that you are scared, but you're also like, man, this is so beautiful. And I love this movie. The swimming pool scene is, I mean, I know this is a remake, but it's one of my favorite scenes in all of horror in the last, 15, 20
Mhm.
years.
Mhm.
Just so great. And just the level of tension that's built up. And, it deals with bullying in a very interesting way. It deals with, who we let in to our lives in a very interesting way.
Mhm.
It has that kind of double entendre dealing with letting in the vampire. Of course, you have to invite them in, but it also deals with letting people into your life and,
Mhm.
who you share things with. And I think it's a beautiful story. It is bleak in terms of like, there's not really a lot of quote unquote hope in this movie for
Sure.
some of these characters. Richard Jenkins, one of the great character actors of all time, in my opinion, puts in just a stellar, out of this world performance in this movie as her
Mhm.
handler, as Abby's
Sure.
handler. But yeah, Chloe Grace Moretz and her beautiful performance at only the age of 13, and she also played Hit
Mhm.
Girl the same
Yeah.
year with Nicolas Cage,
Wild.
which is one that I was maybe going to name, but I just
Yeah.
talked about that movie on a previous episode, so I was like, I'm going to
Sure.
do Let Me In. I love her. I think she is such a talent. Um, she's just very magnetic, and everything she's in, you can tell she's like top tier in terms of the craft of acting. So,
Mhm.
yeah, she's one of my favorite actresses, and I wanted to name it. I can't believe she was only 13 when those two movies came out, talking about Kick Ass and Let Me In. But that's my number four. What do you think about her in this film?
So, I love this film. It's one of my favorites of 2011. Is that when it came out?
2010.
2010.
2010. Hmm.
Yeah. I love this film, and I don't know if this is going to get me in trouble, but I think it's better than the Swedish version. And
Okay. All
I
right.
I love them both, don't get me wrong. I think they're both very good, but there is something about Reeves's direction here, the atmosphere of it. A lot of it, I think, is also Michael Giacchino's score, which is fantastic.
Hmm.
But yeah, these two performers and how they drive that connection between the two. Chloe Grace is great, but Cody Smith McPhee is also quite terrific. You could throw
Yep.
him on as an honorable
Hmm.
mention, not just for this film, but really a couple different films.
Hmm.
But yeah, they're both absolutely incredible. Richard Jenkins is great, as you noted as well. So yeah, I'm a big fan of this film. It's one of my favorite Matt Reeves films as well. And honestly, when they announced that he was doing the Planet of the Apes movies, I kept thinking about this one as to why I was always confident about what he would do with those films. And then he didn't disappoint with either of those either. But yeah, for me, a lot of it circles back to his work here, and I think it's quite underrated. I don't know if people talk about this film as much as they should, and these
Yeah,
performers, these
I agree.
performances as
I
well.
agree. I think it's tough when you have a remake, but kind of like what you said, I mean, it's on par for me with the original. I don't know if I'm going to come out on my show and say it's better than the original, but I wouldn't argue with anybody saying that. I mean, they're
Mhm,
both so good for really for different reasons. I mean, the cinematography is different. It
mhm,
has a different kind of like feel. I mean, the tone's the same, the story is essentially the same, but it
mhm.
just if you put them split screen next to each other, they don't really look the same, even though they're kind of
Yeah,
telling the same story.
yeah,
And a lot of that
that's
has to do
fair.
with the
Yeah,
direction and the technical stuff involved. But
yeah.
I've just always been such a big fan of hers, and I think it's funny that I didn't name Hit Girl here because I can remember seeing that when it came out in 2010.
Mhm.
Like I said, she was 13, and I can remember seeing that, not knowing who she was, and just going, "Wow!" Because I think let me think for a second. No, my daughter would have only been like 9 or 10 years old at the time, but anyway, I remember thinking like this young girl is acting against Nicolas Cage and she's literally owning every scene like she's in,
Yeah,
like she's dominating this movie. an absolute scene stealer with literally no experience on the big screen. And I was just really
Yeah.
taken with her, and I've kind of followed her career, for the last, I guess
Yeah.
it would be 13 years or so. And I'm a big fan of hers. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
and as a
Really
horror
great.
fan too, I really like this one. So,
Yeah. It's very good. I do like the subtle melancholy of the film. There's something about the tenderness of the performers that I really like. And you noted it gets bleak in places, but man, I think they handle all of that with great diligence. And I don't know, there's something about that melancholy that speaks to me. And again, I like the Swedish version. It is very good,
mhm.
but gun to my head, I think I slightly
I get
prefer
it. I get it.
the remake.
I get it. I mean, it made my top 5 remakes. It also made my
Yeah.
top 5 vampire movies when we did that
Mhm.
with my friend Brad
Yeah.
from Cinema
Yeah.
Guys.
Yeah.
It's been on a few lists of mine. It's one of my favorite remakes for sure, and one of my favorite vampire films. So, Chloe Grace Moretz from Let Me In is my number 4, and I could cheat and say Kick Ass too because I can't believe she did both of those the same year.
I
But man,
know.
just
Two
so
very different performances. And
yeah,
she
yeah,
nailed both of them. Yeah.
yeah, so good, man, so good at the age of
Yeah.
13. All right, so we're up to you for your number 3, JD. What do you got?
All right, number 3 for me, again, listeners of our show, I'm gonna mention this film and this name, and they're gonna be like, "Oh, of course."
Yeah.
It is the 1959
Oh wow,
Francois Truffaut film, The 400 Blows. This is in my top 10 movies of all time. The performance is
wow.
Jean-Pierre Léaud. Again, I'm probably butchering that name, but man, what a performance.
Okay, what's the
Absolutely
premise here? I haven't
blew me
seen this. What?
away.
Tell me about it.
So this is about a young child in the 50s. And what's interesting to me about this film, so he's living his life with his parents. His parents seemingly are offering him enough, not just in terms of his physical needs, but emotionally. They're in his life. But as we see in the character, he begins lashing out and misbehaving and lying to his parents. And I think what's fascinating about this movie and what I am so drawn to, especially as a parent myself, is that it becomes this incredibly rich and potent examination of not just the difficulties of childhood, and it certainly gets into that here a little bit, but also parenting, because Antoine, the Leod character here, we see many scenes early on that, again, his parents are around, they're able to give him attention and love. The problem is there is a disparity between how the parents perceive that and how Antoine perceives that. The kind of love and the kind of attention that Antoine needs to be emotionally fulfilled, he is not getting from his parents. His parents are around, but they're treating him in a way that pushes him away instead of brings him closer. And I think there's this interesting truth that Truffaut is getting at here, and how we as adults, as a parents, can sometimes be blind to those level of details, like that kind of nuance. It's one thing to be around and to love the child the way you want to do it,
Mhm.
but that's not necessarily what they need in their lives. And if that isn't rectified, the child will then go find that satisfaction in other things. And that's
Okay.
ultimately what Antoine does here. He fulfills that emotional void by lashing out and by lying and misbehaving and doing these things that on the surface seem reckless and maybe a little bit selfish. And then the film suggests that maybe the parents are mostly at fault here, or at least they're just as much at fault. And ultimately, by the end of the film, and I do love that Truffaut doesn't answer as to he's not handing out blame. He's not saying
Mhm.
it's Antoine's fault. It's not the parents' fault. It's somewhere in the middle. And I'm a big believer that most of life is somewhere in the middle. We live in this
Sure.
giant gray area a lot of the time. There
Mhm.
are certainly cases of exclusivity for sure. There's no doubt about that. But when it comes to parent and child relationships, I think at times, you can be blind to certain things that, or the certain perspectives in which we see the world. And this film gets to all of that in these really great ways that I love. And Jean-Pierre Lauad, the way there's something about the thematic underbelly of the film that I love, but also I could sit here and talk to you for another 40 minutes about the way he interacts with the camera here. I think is just absolutely fascinating. Like the way Truffaut frames and composes this film is truly breathtaking. And Lauad, man, he is magnetic. He knows that there's a camera there and is engaging with it in this incredibly subtle way that I absolutely love. It's just great. I love it. It's one of the best child performances. One of my favorite performances really of all time.
Wow. It's nice. Great. High praise. One thing I know for sure, JD, is when I have these in-session film boys on, I have homework after. I mean, I had Jay Ledbetter on a couple months ago, and we did 90 minutes or less movies.
Oh yeah,
And this guy brought the heat with all these like old school like Charlie Chaplin movies, and I was like, I haven't seen those. Yeah. So I have a list he gave me. I've already got 2 on my list tonight that you have given me. So I have not seen this one, but it's called The 400 Blows, right?
The 400 Blows. Yeah, it's a French New Wave film, 1959. Right. Great stuff.
I'll give it a go, man. I'll give it a go. I'll just have an in-session film week where I just watch all the movies that my guests from in-session recommended.
Then all right, so you already mentioned and talk about them all.
Absolutely, man. Yeah. So you already mentioned my number 3, which would be River Phoenix from Stand By Me.
Okay, nice.
Portraying Chris Chambers, kind of the leader of the gang, if you will, of the young kids. Coming of age film. Obviously, you already mentioned Rob Reiner's direction. Definitely one of his best films, if not his best.
Yeah.
Comes from rooted in the Stephen King story, so I immediately am drawn to it as well. Stephen King has a knack, whether you're talking about the It book or whatever, of kind of writing in kids into these kind of disturbing, might be the best word, scenarios. But they still have that childlike wonderment about them, and it's still innocent at its core, even though everything that's going on around them is anything but innocent. So he has a great blend in the writing, and it translated to film here, in my opinion. I've told this story on my podcast before. I don't know if you've heard it, but this was the movie that really made me I love movies. Like I was like 11 or 12 years old, and
my
buddy Michael had a sleepover at my buddy Michael's house, and he had the VHS tape. His parents did. And we literally watched this they wouldn't let him watch it because of the cursing and stuff, and it's rated R.
Yeah.
So we watched it without his parents knowing all night long on a loop. We watched it like 5 or 6 times that night. And we were like reenacting stuff. And the next day we were performing in his yard. Like we were characters from the movie. And I was like 11 years old. And I can just remember that was the first movie that I connected with where I was like looking for that in other movies going forward, seeing myself in the different projects that I was connected to. So this movie holds a very special place to me. River Phoenix was 15 when the movie was shot. Just such a tender, mature performance that you literally can't believe it's a 15-year-old.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So memorable too. And rest in peace. I mean, he was also on my Gone Too Soon top 5 when we did that a while back.
Yeah.
I imagine with this, I mean, we don't know, but I mean, you look at actors like Brad Pitt, DiCaprio. I mean, you look at he could have easily been same tier or higher in terms of his career in movies. I mean, the guy was just, there was no limit. There was no ceiling to what he could do. And the projects that he did do, you could kind of see those hints of brilliance. And unfortunately, because his life was cut short, we didn't get to see the rest of it. But River Phoenix, we matched up there. That's my number 3. So I agree with you, man. There you go. So
I can't believe Joaquin named his son River. Why would they do that to me? That is so good. So beautiful.
I know. Oh, man. It's like, oh, here's my heart. Thanks, guys.
I know. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, for sure.
My gosh. Yeah, great stuff.
All right, so that's my number 3. And like I said, we matched up there. And we are up to our runner-ups. I don't know. Have I heard of this one, JD? What do you got? What do you got at number 2, man? Let's
Yeah,
do
I
it.
mean, I think people know this film.
All right.
The what's interesting is, and I'll be transparent, is I'm certainly having to fight off emotion because listeners of our show know how much this film means to me. I'm going to the world of Ghibli here. I'm going to
Okay.
an animated film, an animated performance. It is Isao Takahata's Grave of the Fireflies.
Okay.
And it is the performance by Ayano Shirashi. I've never known how to pronounce this name, but I think there's an argument to be made that this is the best vocal performance of all time in any animated film. And what's crazy about that, this is the only performance she's ever given. Ever.
Oh, wow.
And it is so good. So good. The level of credence she gives to a 4-year-old. This 4-year-old girl who, with her brother, is trapped under the conditions of World War II in Japan. And because of the devastation around them, they, over the course of the film, start to deteriorate. And the way that she's able to continue to evoke the pure joy of a child, of a 4-year-old who was completely oblivious to everything happening around her, to me is unreal. It is incredible, the pragmatism that she gives to this performance. I hear it, and, especially the first time I watched this, my son was about the same age as Setsuko here, and obviously different cultures, different languages, but that innocence, that pure joy that a 4-year-old has, that is universal. It is incredibly universal. And I could see that pragmatism that I experience every single day with my son. It is in this performance.
Wow.
This 4-year-old performance, that to me, like that alone is incredible. And especially when you couple it with the devastation around her, and that juxtaposition is really jarring, but in a really great Ghibli-esque way. What's really captivating to me, though, and maybe what is even more heartbreaking, is that over the course of the film, and as these characters deteriorate further and further and further, she is able to still tap into that innocence while somehow the vocal performance matches the deterioration, if that makes sense. Like you can feel, like, in the lines of dialogue and the sighs and just the subtle cues coming out of the character, that there's something really wrong. Like the character is suffering, but the character still is embodying not the death and carnage around her or that's happening to her, but the innocence of a 4-year-old. And to me, it is mind blowing. I'm still utterly shaken by this performance. The first time I watched it, I mean, I would be walking around the neighborhood and I would just randomly start weeping. Like it was so
it affects you,
incredibly potent. And then we rewatched it this last fall because we did a Ghibli series on the podcast, and similarly just blew me away. I can't believe how subtly layered this performance is from an actress that we've never heard of since.
Yeah, that's crazy.
One and doneer.
I didn't know that fact. That's crazy.
4 years old, but truly one of the most breathtaking vocal performances in any animated film ever. And because of its potency, for me, it's really high on my list. So I have it here at number 2. And I made it through that without crying, although I almost lost it once.
You did good, man. You did good. So I'm going to be covering the Studio Ghibli films on my Patreon because I haven't seen any of them, if you can believe it. So we're going to cover all of them.
I'm very excited for you, to be perfectly honest, and somewhat jealous, because I would love to have the experience of seeing them for the first time again. They're so magical. They're one of a kind, a unique studio. So yeah, I'm very excited for you to to go through them all.
I'm looking forward to checking it out, and you know, another one. And I think I was joking earlier, but I think Jay had a Studio Ghibli on his top 5 when we did that too for 90 or minutes or less as well. I can't remember which one it was, but
Yeah,
My Neighbor
makes sense.
Totoro, maybe.
Yeah, I was gonna say maybe Totoro. I'm trying to
Yeah,
recall the run
I
times,
think
but that
Totoro. Yeah.
that makes sense. Yeah,
So
yeah, that's
I
a great film
gotta
too.
I'm gonna get through all that catalog, and I'm looking forward to it. Drew
Mhm.
Hallam, you know, is over in the chat. He says that Grave of the Fireflies is an excellent choice. He said Roger Ebert calls the film one of his favorite war movies,
Yeah,
even though it's an animated film. So that's pretty cool.
yeah, and
So,
it's Iso Takahata has stated that he didn't set out to make a war film per se.
mhm.
I mean, when you watch the film, I mean, it can't help itself but become an anti-war commentary. But the
Mhm.
film really does a great job of not being about war is bad. It really isn't about the war as much as it is these two kids trying to survive these harrowing circumstances. Um, so yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, I understand where he's coming from there, but yeah, it's one of the best war films of all time, hands down.
Well, there you go. That's your runner up. So my number 2 is a performance that floored me when I saw it. I think that it benefited the child performance here benefited from the movie being such a kind of mind fuck, where it really kind of just caught the audience off guard across the board. It was kind of like pre social media. The internet was around, but it wasn't like you could be spoiled at every time you click on a button.
Mhm.
Haley Joel Osment from The
Mhm.
Sixth Sense.
Yeah.
M. Night Shyamalan, I just saw Knock at the Cabin last night, actually. I mean, he's a filmmaker that I might have the most respect for, because this
Mm.
guy will just, you know, on paper, there's such fascinating, whether it's science fiction or horror or whatever it is, there's such fascinating stories. And sometimes they don't translate to screen, and I'll admit that. But in The Sixth Sense, I mean, this is, in my opinion, a thrill in terms of a thriller, a masterpiece, in my opinion.
Mhm.
It's just so crafted so perfectly. Leading up to that ending plot twist that Shyamalan kind of run his career for a while,
Yeah.
wanting to kind of recreate that. But
Yeah.
nevertheless, if you look at this one
Uh-huh.
project as just one thing, it was just crafted perfectly from a technical standpoint, screenplay, you know, Bruce Willis, like the whole thing. But
Mhm.
none of it would work without Haley Joel Osment's really centered, grounded, realistic, like I'm a kid in fear performance. I mean, I felt bad for this kid the whole movie. I was rooting for him from the very first frame, and I really felt like he was terrified. And
Mhm.
if you were a kid, he was 11 when this was filmed. If you were 10 or 11 years old and you were seeing dead people, as he says,
Mhm.
you would be fucking freaked out, and you would be terrified and would not be able to sleep, and
Yeah.
your life would be miserable. And I feel like he really sold that in this movie. And
Yeah.
like I said, without that performance, I don't think Shyamalan has a masterpiece on his hands here. But
Yeah.
because of what Haley Joel Osment did, it's an unforgettable, just one of the best movies possibly ever. I didn't look on the
Mhm.
IMDb 250, but it might be AFI or whatever. I don't know, but I wouldn't be surprised if it was in like the top 100 or top
Mhm.
250 movies ever. It's just such a zeitgeist pop culture phenomenon too, and everybody
Yeah.
kind of knows of it,
Mhm.
or knows the twist, or I see dead people. Everybody knows that, you know,
Yeah,
even
it's
if you haven't seen
classic.
the movie.
Yeah.
So that's
Yeah.
my number 2, man. What do you think?
Yeah, no, that's a great pick. Love Haley Joel Osment. Really love that film as well. I mean, and not just Osment, but that entire cast is really quite fantastic. And they're having to give tricky performances, right? Because the screenplay knows where this is headed, but they can't, it can't give out any clues as to where
Mhm.
it's going to go. So they have to ride that line of being believable in terms of the sleight of hand out play, and they're all very good at that. And Haley Joel Osment is not, he's not only able to tap into that, but the emotional underbelly of the film and how that comes about. He's so good in this film. I will admit though, in my true honorable mentions, I have Haley Joel Osment, but for a different film, for
Okay.
Steven Spielberg's AI, which I think
Mhm.
is one of the most heartbreaking experiences I've had. And he's similarly like he is the nucleus of that movie, and it all falls apart without his performance. So again, kind of writing a very tricky line in that film as well. But it speaks to just how good he was as a child actor.
Yeah,
truly,
exactly.
truly a phenomenon.
Yeah, love it. My son is 9. My oldest son is 9, and I'm like, when can I show him Sixth Sense? Because I don't want him to be spoiled, and I want to kind of like see him find out, the end. So I'm thinking like maybe 11, 12 years old. I'll let him go for it, but I'm hoping I can make it another few years without him being spoiled for the plot twist. But
that's true. It is the world of the internet these days.
I remember seeing that with my grandmother in '99 when it came out. I can remember seeing that in the theater with my grandma. We went to like a matinee, and we were both just like, "What?"
Yeah.
Like you just sit there like,
it's stunning.
I mean, Shyamalan crafted such a great plot twist because I can figure stuff out, but effective. I didn't see that coming. Yeah,
I didn't either. Yeah.
So there you go. Sixth Sense, Haley Joel Osment's my number 2, and we're up to our number 1s. JD from In Session Film has got a sweet list going over there. Homework for Gerald, adding to the Jay Ledbetter list I have on my computer, but that's fine. What do you got at number 1, man?
Okay, so my number 1, this is a film that I'm pretty confident you've seen. You've definitely seen this one. So after going around the globe, from Russia to France to Japan, we're back in the States. We're going to the world of Steven Spielberg once again. As much as I love AI and Osment in that film, but I'm going with Henry Thomas, E.T. So
yeah, for sure, man.
I have, like many others out there listening, watching this, have a nostalgia with that film. And if we were to do this list, let's say 5 years ago, I don't know if Henry Thomas makes my top 5. I did revisit for a review we had on the podcast, and I was more blown away than I was anticipating with Henry Thomas and his performance. And I think it also circles back to, appropriately so, off the heels of 2022 and The Fabelmans. What's fascinating to me about Spielberg and that narrative is that the story of The Fabelmans isn't anything new. Like he's done this in his movies, and not just with E.T., but Close Encounters of the Third Kind, which is my personal favorite Spielberg. That film is engulfed with his childhood and the struggles that we see in The Fabelmans. It's all over that movie, but it's also all over E.T. E.T. in many respects is an allegory on divorce. And it's fascinating having that conversation a few years ago and then repurposing it in The Fabelmans this last year. Just fascinating. But I do think it's a big part of that movie and Henry Thomas's performance. And it's something that when you watch it as a kid, you don't pick up on those things because, as we've been talking about, as we noted at the beginning of this with Stand By Me or any of these child performances, you just, there's a lot of life to live. You don't have quite the experiences. And when in watching E.T., as a child, you're so drawn to the story of the children and the family and the camaraderie they have with E.T. But watching it as an adult now, it is fascinating to see the rhythms in which Spielberg was operating in terms of the film's allegory, because there is this repeating motif regarding the father of this family, how he's off in Mexico with his girlfriend. And then that becomes, so there's this void in Elliot's life that he fills by bonding with this creature. And I don't think that was an accident on Spielberg's part. I think that was very purposeful. And then to see how that camaraderie comes about, and of course it's very playful at times, it's very funny, and it is so endearing in how all of that works. And then as the dramatic urgency of the film ramps up in the third act, the emotion of it starts to stir in these really incredible ways. And then you get to that final sequence of the film, which for my money is one of the best endings ever put to cinema.
Sure.
And so much of it is Henry Thomas. I mean, and not just the the scene at the very end, but when they're trying to rescue him, trying to resuscitate ET, trying to get him out of this government facility. I mean, the eye work by Henry Thomas there is truly phenomenal. It is really incredible, as if he, and famously they shot this film, you know, from beginning to end, as the story is. And so, and maybe that was a part of it, that Henry Thomas he had already bonded with ET. They've already had all of these fun experiences, and now things are getting, like, the stakes of the film have heightened, and he is really believing what he is doing creatively. I don't know. Maybe that's just the magic of Spielberg, because, man, he is there isn't anyone better as far as getting great child performances than Spielberg.
That's true. That's true.
And what he gets out of Henry Thomas is just truly, truly phenomenal. And it took a second watch. It took for me to watch it as an adult and to see those intricate layers that Spielberg was really operating on. As fun as it, you know, being this fun blockbuster that is going to make lots of money because it's a fun blockbuster.
Yeah.
But at the same time, there's this incredible artistic nostalgia to it from Spielberg's point of view that I think makes Henry Thomas's performance all the more incredible to me, and all the more poignant with how it all crystallizes there at the end, given the allegory and what E.T. truly represents for Elliot, is just really heartbreaking. So I love it. Henry Thomas, my number one.
I love it, man. You know, one of the greatest, like, one of the things I take the most pride in as a father is, as like 2 or 3 years ago, we were redoing my son's room. He's 9 now. He was probably like 7 at the time. And I said, "All right, dude, you got this wall here over your bed. Like, we can put a movie poster. I'll frame it. We'll put it above your bed." And he picked E.T.
Nice.
because we had seen it that year.
Yeah.
But, you know, to my point, like, it just lives on. Like, it doesn't matter. Like, all the themes that are kind of built into that story from the eyes of a child, like, will never get old. You know, they'll never outgrow kind of the things that, you know, we see through Henry Thomas's eyes. I mean, Drew Barrymore is great in this, you know, introduced to the world.
Yeah.
A lot of great child performances. But yeah, I mean, this is a classic. It's one of my favorite movies of all time. One of my favorite movies to watch with the family.
Sure.
And Spielberg is the GOAT, man. I mean, he is, you know, puts
Spielberg.
kids in movies, you know, I mean, anywhere from 5 years old to, you know, 15 years old or whatever. And he just, you know, he just elicits something from them that, you know, he's one of those filmmakers that just, I don't think it's luck. I think it has a lot to do with who he chooses and his craft and how he directs. But
well, and I think it circles back to that overall ethos I was talking about earlier, that we still clutch onto our childhood in some way. And I brought up Citizen Kane. The camera is his rosebud. And I think that is evident in every single one of his movies, but especially when he is working with children. And I think it's just because he's a child at heart. And I think his childhood means so much to him, for better or worse, as we saw in The Fabelmans, that, you know, he loves to kind of linger in that time and to really wrestle with who he's become as a result of those experiences. And that's why he loves working with kids, you know, because it means so much to him personally. And man, that comes through in ET. And so
I agree.
Incredible ways.
I agree.
Yeah.
Great pick. Great pick. I considered it for sure. I love that movie, and I wholeheartedly agree with the pick. My number one is in a different direction, but it was when the world was introduced to Natalie Portman. 1994, the year I graduated high school, in Leon the Professional. She was 13 years old. I think, let me go back and make sure I don't misquote myself here. Yeah, she was 13 years old at the time of production. And it's a story, it's like an action movie. Gary Oldman plays one of the fucking great all-time villains in this movie. Just so memorable, literally
So
hamming
good.
up this camera.
Oh, yeah.
Such a badass in this. But, her performance in particular just takes this trajectory that's really fascinating because she's this kind of like shy, down on her luck kid in the beginning, kind of in this broken home. And, the tragedy occurs with her family and her young brother, which was really the
Mhm.
heartbreaker for her. So she directs all that grief kind of to revenge and
Mhm.
wanting to get revenge. And she just so happens to live next door to this hitman who kills people for a living. And they develop this kind of unique friendship, kind of like mentor protege relationship. And it's just really fascinating to see her do that character kind of coming out of grief and turning into basically an assassin by the end of the
Mhm.
movie. And it's a very like harrowing, heartbreaking story from her character's perspective because
Yeah.
even with Leon, you get the sense that everybody she's close to, she's just not going to be able to have the connection that she wants. Um, so it is a little hopeless in that way. It's a little ambiguous at the end, but you get
Mhm.
the idea that she's not going to be a happy kid.
Yeah.
But just the badassery from Natalie Portman at age 13, and I graduated high school in '94 when this movie came out. I saw it
Yeah.
shortly thereafter. So it was really impressionable on me at the time, and I can just remember thinking, "This is so awesome that they got this young girl to just be this badass, like, revenge hit woman in this
Mhm.
movie," and it really stuck with me. It's one of my favorite movies, and I think Natalie Portman is one of the best actresses alive, in my opinion.
Mhm.
Uh, Black Swan is probably her best, or at least my favorite performance of hers. But
Okay.
I mean, she's killer, man. She just does
She
so much.
is.
She's such a great actress, and I think it kind of started here with The Professional. So that's my number one. What do you think, JD?
Yeah, I mean, you can't go wrong with Natalie Portman. Trying to think here off the cuff. Jackie is probably my favorite
Jackie is
performance of
good.
hers.
Hmm.
However, as it relates to Leon the Professional, I think it can be summed up in this way. When you look up the film on Letterboxd, one of the top comments simply says, quote, I wonder if Natalie Portman ever thinks about how badass it was that she outacted everyone around her at age 13. End quote.
Yeah,
That
I mean,
sums it up.
I I thought that too. I mean,
Yeah.
Gary Oldman maybe, but I mean, yeah, she was doing her thing, and you just can't forget it. She was just it was
Yeah.
such great casting. Like,
Great.
and I'm
Yeah.
so happy for it because of what we have now in her career, which of course every role leads to the next role. So
Mhm.
I think a lot of it probably started with The Professional here in the
Mhm.
early '90s, and now we have Queen Natalie Portman doing her thing. So that's my
Absolutely.
number one. That's my number one child performance. 13 years old at the time of production. JD, we're gonna take a break, man. When we come back, we're gonna give our honorable mentions. I'm forcing you to give five only because
It's
we're
gonna be so
already at an
boring.
hour, but that's okay.
Yeah.
And we'll take a break. We'll come back. We got the Golden Peas Movie Awards coming up. JD actually, my boy here, and Nicole Ackman gave the
Yeah.
nominees
That was
and the
great fun.
nominations announcement. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I loved it, man. Thanks so much for doing it. It's over on
Mhm.
YouTube if you guys want to check it out. But the movie awards are coming up on March 13th. So make sure you vote. And we're going to run a promo for that. And when we come back, like I said, we'll give our honorable mentions and we will also shout out the fans online. So everybody sit tight. Me and JD will be right back. JD, I'm just going to grab a beer, man. I'll be right back.
Okay. Yeah, no problem.
I think I told you last time my wife got me a beer fridge out here in the garage now, so I don't even have to
Nice.
go in the house to get a beer anymore.
There you go. Yeah.
Like right here.
And look, I
All right, man.
apologize in advance for making this over an hour.
No, you're fine, dude. I was just
I just
messing with you. You're good, dude. Don't worry about it.
I'm just having a ball over here.
Yeah, it's been a great conversation, man. Don't worry about it.
Mhm.
All right, so give me like 5 seconds. I'll come back in,
Yep.
and when we do honorables, JD, when I turn it over to you, just list your 6 through 10. You just like
Okay.
list them
Yep.
in order.
Gotcha.
What's up, guys? Welcome back. As I said pre-break, me and my buddy JD from In Session Film are here, and we are discussing our top 5 child movie performances. Anybody that blew us away under the age of 16 when they acted in these films. and we had a great discussion there. JD, will you remind everyone real quick? Just go through your top 5 again. Just list them 5
Yeah.
to 1 just to remind everybody.
Sure. At number 5 was River Phoenix and Stand By Me. At number 4, Nikolai Burilev from Ivan's Childhood. At number 3, Jean-Pierre Léaud from The 400 Blows. And number 2, Ayano Shirashi from Grave of the Fireflies. And then number 1, Henry Thomas and E.T.
Great list, man. My top 5 was, number 5 was Macaulay Culkin from Home Alone, from the Home Alone films. Number 4 was Chloe Grace Moretz from Let Me In. My number 3 was River Phoenix from Stand By Me. Number 2 was Haley Joel Osment from The Sixth Sense. And my number 1 was Miss Natalie Portman from Leon the Professional from 1994.
Yeah.
So there we go. A nice, well-rounded list. Only one crossover, which is always cool. Now, what we're going to do now is we're going to give our honorable mentions, guys. So these are just a few that did not quite crack our top 5, but we wanted to make sure we mention. JD is in pain because I told him he can only do 5.
It's so... I know. I literally have 30 listed here.
Oh, God. You got to send apology emails to all these people you're about to leave off.
I know.
So go ahead. What were your honorable mentions over there, buddy?
Okay. So you noted that one of the times when Jay was on here, he mentioned Charlie Chaplin and gave you some homework to do. I don't know if he talked about this film, but one of my honorable mentions might be my 5B, if I'm being honest, is Jackie Coogan in Chaplin's The Kid. Oh, my God. What a great film that is. Sabir Banerjee, again, forgive me if I'm butchering that name, from Satyajit Ray's Padar Panchali is an honorable mention for me. Okay. I noted earlier Haley Joel Osment and Spielberg's AI, Artificial Intelligence. I have Quivanjane Wallace from Beasts of the Southern Wild on here. And then my last honorable mention is Ivana Baquero from Guillermo del Toro's Pan's Labyrinth.
Oh, good one. Actually, I didn't think about that one. That's a good one. All right, my number 6 would have been Linda Blair from The Exorcist.
Yeah, that's great. That's a great one.
Literally iconic, and to hear what she went through in that production after the fact. I mean, it's sad, but still a very memorable and iconic performance that is unforgettable. My number 7 would have been an actress that I really just rally around her entire career, so I might be a little biased, but she was 12 years old. It was Kirsten Dunst, An Interview with the Vampire.
Oh yeah, I love that pick. That's good. Yeah, that's a good one.
I mean, if you could steal a scene when you're sharing camera space with Brad Pitt and Tom Cruise, you're doing something right. I mean,
crazy that she got to work with those two in the same movie, and it's Interview with the Vampire. Crazy.
I mean, it's wild.
Love it. Yeah.
One of my favorite, kind of tender, kind of quirky comedy ones is Abigail Breslin from Little Miss Sunshine. My number 8.
Yeah, love that.
Kind of a dark horse pick, and also the oldest actor in my top 10 is Millicent Simmons from A Quiet Place.
Oh, yes.
My number 9.
Good call. Yeah.
And then rounding out my top 10 would have been another actress that I've just championed her entire career, very similar to when I mentioned Chloe Moretz at the top, but it's Dakota Fanning from I Am Sam.
Okay, yeah.
She was 7 years old, and I feel like she held her own against Sean Penn, Michelle Pfeiffer. She just, it's a very tender movie where she was a standout in that film at age 7.
For sure.
And she's gone on to be a superstar. So there you go, guys. Those are our 10. I'm sorry, JD, but only 10 child performances.
Once this goes live, I'm just going to tweet out my 30.
Here's my other. Here's the rest of my list that Gerald would let me say.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. So what we like to do to end every episode, JD, is we go over to Facebook and we open up the old suggestion box and we see what the fans had to say. To see if they mentioned any that we failed to mention, but we'll go over there. I just said, what are some of the best child acting movie performances under 16 years old? All right. So here we go. Lindsay Dunn, friend of mine and friend of the show, says Anna Paquin from The Piano.
Yeah, that's on my list. That's one I have.
Didn't she win an Oscar for that? I feel like she did, right? Or was nominated.
She was at least nominated. I don't know if she. I can't remember if she won. Yeah.
Yeah, and then she also has Kirsten Dunst from Interview, and then Noah Jupe from Honey Boy, which I like that.
Okay.
That shout out.
Yeah, that's a good one.
The young version of Shia LaBeouf in that movie.
Yep.
Let's see. Joey Austin, patron and friend of the show, says Macaulay Culkin in Uncle Buck. He says.
Okay.
Yeah, that's good. He was good in that.
Yeah.
Anna Chlumsky in My Girl.
Oh.
Tatum O'Neal in Paper Moon.
the My Girl pick, I'm
Mhm.
mad at myself. I didn't think of that one.
Mhm.
I don't know if it would have cracked my 5 anyway, but my God, what a performance. That at least that's a subjective childhood favorite of mine for sure.
Yeah, for sure. It's a heartbreaker though.
Oh yeah,
Tearjerker for
big
sure.
time. Big time. Yeah.
Let's see. Pete from Podstalgic and Cobra Kai says The Sixth Sense. Haley Joel Osment. He
Mhm.
also says Kirsten Dunst from Interview with the Vampire.
Okay.
My
Yep.
Girl. He also mentioned, and he
Mhm.
says basically all the kids from It from 2017.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Very good.
Yeah. Jared Taylor, patron and friend of the show, says River Phoenix from Stand By Me. Linda Blair from The Exorcist. Henry Thomas from E.T. Haley Joel Osment from The Sixth Sense, and
Mhm.
Leon the Professional's Natalie Portman. So he has my list with the ETs. That's pretty
Yeah,
good.
it sounds like it. Yeah.
I did good
Yeah.
there. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. How about this? Tony Dabish, patron of the show. He says Jodie Foster in Taxi Driver. What do you think about that?
Oh, love that. Yeah,
Me
that's a
too.
very good one. Yeah.
Yeah, me too. Tom Holland in Impossible.
The Impossible, I got that on my
Yeah.
list as
Yeah.
well. Maybe we'll just
Uh,
hit the rest of them. Hopefully the comments
I
hit
was
the
gonna say
rest of
maybe
mine.
you were just naming the rest of yours. Saoirse Ronan in Atonement.
Yes.
That's a
Yes.
good one.
That's
Yeah, and then
probably my number 11.
he says Brooklyn Prince from the Florida Project.
Yes, also on my list. So good job,
There you
everybody.
go. Hey, we are doing good here. Let's see if
Yeah.
there's any we haven't mentioned as we wrap up here. I got to mention my buddy Dan that we talked about earlier from Netflix and Swill. He's a
Mhm.
producer here and he's a patron of the show. He says
Mhm.
Macaulay Culkin in Home Alone,
Mhm.
Abigail Breslin in Little Miss Sunshine, and Jacob Tremblay in The
Yeah,
Room
in the room.
or
Yeah.
Room.
Well, yeah, just room. Yes.
Yeah, not The Room. Sorry,
You got to make that distinction. Yes.
I don't think he
Apologies.
was in The Room. I apologize.
No. Definitely
If
not.
so, it probably wouldn't have been on the list. All right.
Yeah, yeah.
Dan Roski, top tier patron of the show, a promising young loyal. He says Mara Wilson in Matilda. Okay.
Okay, yeah. I like that
I
one.
like these next two though. One of them is prominent in our current climate right now in award season, but he says Ki Kwan in Temple of Doom.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's great, man. Look
Yeah,
what that guy's going on
that's
to do.
fun. I
Just
know.
yeah,
On his
great
way
man.
to an Oscar.
Yeah, I agree. He says Heather O'Rourke in Poltergeist. Uh,
Okay. Yeah, I didn't even
Peter
think of that
Ostrom
one.
and yeah, I didn't either. Peter Ostrom and Willy Wonka and Danny Lloyd in The Shining. There you go.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one. Yeah.
Yeah. Let's see. Michael Hill, friend of mine and patron of the show, says he's got a couple that we already mentioned, but he says also Freddie Highmore and August Rush.
Oh, that's another personal favorite of mine. I know that film wasn't received well critically, but
Mhm.
I don't know. I kind of dig it. I really like it, and a lot
Yeah,
of
it's a
it
good
is
movie.
that central performance. Yeah.
He also has Kristen Stewart in Panic Room.
Okay. Yep.
I
Yep.
don't know how old she was when she filmed that, but I
I'm
freaking
not sure
love her.
either.
So I'm with you on
Yeah.
that, Michael.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good pick. I like it too.
And then his last mention is Hayden Pantier from Remember the Titans. Let's see. Brett Parker,
Okay.
patron of the show, friend of mine from Dissect That Film. He says Christina Ricci from the Addams Family movies.
Okay.
All
Yeah.
right. Yeah.
There we go.
Madeline McGraw from The Black Phone. Did you like The Black
Uh,
Phone this past year?
that was a blind spot. That was one I sadly did
Oh,
not
okay.
catch up with.
All right. He's got Jacob Tremblay as well, but it's from Doctor Sleep.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And then he also says the cast of It Chapter 1.
Yeah.
I got a couple more here. So Lauren Scott, friend of mine, says Brandon Baker and Johnny Tsunami. And then she says, I said what I said. So sticking to
Love
her
it.
guns there. Yeah.
Love it.
And then
So
we
I don't know if
go
I
ahead.
woke up today knowing that I was going to be on the show, that Johnny Tsunami was going to be mentioned in any way, shape, or form. So
I
I
love
love that.
Lauren so much, and she's the best. So that's a good
Yeah, that's
shout out there.
great.
And then we will end on our buddy Drew Hallam. He's actually watching over on YouTube right now. Drew says Lonnie Chavis and Ezra Dewey from The Boy Behind the Door. That was a Shudder original horror movie. Did you see that one, JD?
No, that's one I unfortunately didn't get a chance to see either.
It's a really good, really tense, like home invasion film. So I recommend
Okay.
you check it out.
Okay.
He also has Roman Griffin Davis from Jojo Rabbit. That's a good one.
Oh, yeah. I like that. Yeah.
Macaulay Culkin from The Good Son, he says.
Okay.
That was the horror film with Elijah Wood, I think.
Yeah.
Linda Blair from The Exorcist, the entire cast of Stand By Me. And then I wanted to ask your opinion, being the in-session film guy. but he also mentioned Tatum O'Neal from Paper Moon, and I saw that on a
Mm,
ton of lists on Google when I was searching, but
yeah.
I've never seen that movie. So are you familiar with Tatum O'Neal and Paper Moon? She acted opposite her father in that, right?
Yeah, so very good performance, and it's it's on my list as an honorable mention, but I'll be perfectly honest, I just haven't seen the film in so long that I didn't feel confident talking about it
Mhm.
per
Mhm.
se, or how it would crack my top 10. I would just need to revisit the film. I've seen it some years ago,
Mhm.
and I really love the performance. It is a great, at the very
I
least, a
think
great honorable mention. But
I think what I realized when I was doing my research is that's kind of a consensus child
mhm,
performance pick,
yeah,
but I just
mhm.
haven't seen it. So there was no way I could, like you said, there
Definitely
was no
worth
way I could.
watching.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I'll have to
Yeah.
check it out for sure. All right, JD, this was a lot of fun, man.
Yeah.
I love, just like when I listen to your show in session, I love just hearing the passion and the
Mhm.
love that you have for movies and acting, and it just comes through, man. And
Thank
you're
you.
an inspiration. You and Brendan, and I mean JD and Ryan, or I should say Jay and Ryan, they're okay. Like they're
They're okay.
fine.
Yeah, they do
Yeah,
okay.
they're
Yeah,
all
they're
right.
alright.
Okay, you know
Yeah.
what I mean? But no, all
Yeah.
of you guys are great. But thanks so much for being here again.
Yeah.
And just
Appreciate
remind
it.
everyone real quick where they can find you and the guys over at In Session. I know it's kind of changing as we speak, but
Mhm.
where should they
Yeah.
go to find you guys?
Yep. So the easiest place to find us is insessionfilm.com. There we have links to all everywhere you can find us, and obviously, as I mentioned earlier, you can now watch the podcast on YouTube. That's youtube.com/insessionfilm. But you can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, anywhere you can listen to podcasts as well. And if you're interested in written reviews and written content, we have a team of writers that writes for us as well, that put up all kinds of great reviews and analysis, award stuff, all kinds of great stuff. And again, you can find all of that at insessionfilm.com. And yeah, thanks for having me. This was a lot of fun. I had a
Absolutely,
blast
man.
doing this.
A- Absolutely, man. Me too. And I really appreciate you being
Hmm.
here. Guys,
Yeah.
all of JD's information will be down below in the show notes. Make sure you check that and give him a follow over there, and subscribe to his YouTube as well so you can check out all the content they're going to be putting out there with the new format of
Yeah.
In Session Film, which is great. I'm
Yeah.
looking forward to being a part of that. As you got to get me
Yeah.
over there, man.
Oh yeah. No,
We gotta do something
once we
soon.
kind of get a handle on how this is going to work for us, we're definitely going to get some guests on. So you'll be one of our
Absolutely.
first calls for sure.
Absolutely, man. And once again, thanks so much for being here.
Yeah,
Guys, we
appreciate it.
will be back next week. We'll have another top five for you and another guest. Until then, everybody take care. All right, man. Let me end this broadcast, but JD, hang out because it's going to have to